Billionaire family. Mocked a black woman at their party minutes later she nuked their $20 B deal. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Who the hell let her in here? The sentence sliced the air open like a shard of glass hurled across a ballroom. Conversations halted. A string from the orchestra trembled off-key. Crystal flutes froze mid-toast. The laughter of the wealthy, bright and sparkling just a second ago, collapsed into a stunned, crackling hush. At the center of the room, beneath a cascade of chandelier light, the matriarch of the Lancaster dynasty stood in her red gown, an eruption of rubies against gold. Her diamonds flashed like tiny mirrors of cruelty. She pointed a manicured finger straight at the woman in white, her expression twisting into something between amusement and contempt. Beside her, her husband, silver-haired, tuxedo crisp, confidence polished by generations of inherited security, threw his head back and laughed. A booming, delighted sound, as if humiliation were nothing more than a punchline crafted for his entertainment. Across from them stood Dr. Naya Sterling, her posture unwavering, the white of her gown glowing like calm in the eye of a storm. No flinch, no recoil, no apology. Her eyes, dark and steady, absorbed every inch of the insult without budging an inch. She didn't look enraged. She looked observant, like someone cataloging consequences before delivering them. At her side, her partner, Malik, kept his shoulders squared. His jaw flexed just once, a silent protest, but he stayed still, a wall of quiet protection. His eyes swept the room, reading it the way trained men read danger, by what moved too quickly and what stopped moving altogether. The matriarch lifted her chin higher, amused by Naya's silence. "Look at her," she sneered, turning to the growing circle of onlookers. "This is a private event for our circle, not charity cases who wandered in by accident." Ripples of laughter spilled out, thin, brittle, eager. The kind of laughter people use when they fear choosing the wrong side. A waiter slowed mid-step. A photographer lowered his camera, as if suddenly unsure whether he should capture the moment or hide from it. The chandeliers glimmered, but something colder flickered beneath the light, a shift, tiny but unmistakable. As if the air itself took one step back. Phones rose. First one, then 5, then dozens. Curiosity tilted into cruelty. The screens framed Naya like a spectacle, a living headline waiting to be twisted. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naya. The matriarch stepped closer, her perfume sharp, expensive, overconfident, cutting through the air between them. "Honestly," she said, lowering her voice as though sharing a secret with the crowd, "if the staff door was locked, you could have simply waited outside. People like you shouldn't assume you're invited." Behind her, her husband chuckled again. "It's a gala, darling, not a community center." A few guests winced, but none spoke. The crowd was a silent jury, witnessing, judging, hiding. Naya didn't move. Not her shoulders, not her breath, only her eyes. Eyes that carried a weight the Lancasters were too privileged to recognize. A weight that didn't belong to fear, but to decision. And when she finally did move, it was subtle. A shift of her fingertips against the stem of her glass. A quiet breath pulling through her nose. The soft, controlled reset of her spine as she straightened half a centimeter taller, tiny motions. Barely there. Yet the room felt it. Something cold ran through the chandelier glow, like a shadow passing behind the lights. Malik sensed it too. He glanced at her just once, just enough. She didn't look back, but he knew this stillness. Had seen it before. The moment before she turned logic into action. Naya didn't move, not her shoulders, not her breath, only her eyes. Eyes that carried a weight the Lancasters were too privileged to recognize, a weight that didn't belong to fear, but to decision. And when she finally did move, it was subtle. A shift of her fingertips against the stem of her glass, a quiet breath pulling through her nose, the soft, controlled reset of her spine as she straightened half a centimeter taller, tiny motions. Barely there, yet the room felt it. Something cold ran through the chandelier glow, like a shadow passing behind the lights. Malik sensed it too. He glanced at her just once, just enough. She didn't look back, but he knew this stillness. Had seen it before. The moment before she turned logic into action. And as the matriarch stepped back, satisfied with her own performance, Naya finally lifted her gaze to the chandelier above them. The crystals glittered. The room waited. The insult hung there, suspended between marble floors and golden arches, unaware that it had already triggered the costliest mistake in Lancaster history. Because the woman in white was not the guest they thought she was. And this room, this party, this empire was standing on ground she could pull apart with a sentence. Tonight, she would. The room didn't breathe. It only watched. Naya's stillness had become a gravitational force. Quiet, invisible, undeniable. It bent the space around her, drew eyes from across the ballroom, pulled curiosity out of people who moments ago were entertained by her humiliation. Now they watched with something closer to confusion, maybe even unease. The matriarch mistook that shift for victory. She laughed, a high, crystalline sound meant to dominate the room. "You see?" she said loudly, waving her hand toward Naya as if presenting an exhibit. "This is exactly why standards matter. Anyone can dress up, but real class can't be borrowed." A murmur rose. Not agreement this time, something else. Naya finally lifted her chin, just a fraction. Not enough to challenge, enough to measure. Malik stepped half an inch closer. Not protective, coordinated. He understood her silence, the way some men understand weather patterns. A storm wasn't coming, it was already here. It just hadn't been named yet. A waiter drifted by, tray trembling slightly as he realized Head wandered too close to the epicenter. The matriarch snatched a glass without looking. "Honestly," she added, taking a delicate sip, "I blame security. They can't tell staff from guests anymore." The husband chuckled and tapped his glass against hers. "Can't fix everything with quotas, darling." There it was, another spark tossed onto dry leaves. Phones rose higher. Guests shifted positions for better angles. The humiliation was no longer a scene, it was content. But the air changed again when Naya exhaled. Slow, controlled, a breath sharpened by decision. She glanced around the ballroom at the chandeliers, the marble pillars, the men in tailored tuxedos, pretending this moment wasn't tearing something open inside them. At the rows of tables draped in gold, the floral arrangements imported for absurd amounts of money. At the people who thought they understood wealth because they inherited a last name. And then her eyes settled back on the matriarch. Not angry, not wounded, observing, measuring. What she saw was a family too confident to hide their rot. Malik leaned toward her slightly, voice low enough only she could hear. "Say the word." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was already a countdown. The matriarch took one step closer, her red gown brushing the marble like a threat dressed in silk. "You should really leave," she whispered, but loudly enough for the nearest 10 people to hear. "We wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself further." The chandelier above them flickered, or maybe imagination made it seem so. Moments like these distort perception. They stretch time, thicken silence, sharpen sound. A single violin string trembled again. Naya lifted her glass not to drink, but to place it gently on a nearby table. The soft tap of crystal against wood rippled through the quiet like a coded message. Malik straightened. The matriarch smirked. "Good girl," she murmured. "At least you know when a room isn't yours. Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together." Something electric moved through the crowd, a faint whisper of possibility, a recognition that the balance of the room had just pivoted, almost imperceptibly, toward the woman in white. The matriarch stepped back half a pace, not consciously, but the body often reacts before pride does. She steadied herself with a brittle laugh. "You're bold," she said tightly. "I'll give you that." Bold wasn't the word. Prepared was closer. Decisive was accurate. Unstoppable was inevitable. Malik checked his watch 3 seconds, exactly then looked up. Their team was waiting for her signal. Everything they needed was ready. Naya clasped her hands loosely at her waist, a gesture so simple, so quiet, so final. And with that motion, invisible to most, the fate of the Lancaster dynasty began its silent descent. For a long second, no one moved. The ballroom floated in a strange, suspended stillness, like a chandelier caught mid-swing. The crowd didn't understand why the temperature seemed to drop another degree, why their chests felt tight, or why the woman in white suddenly looked inevitable. They didn't know her name. Not yet. But they were about to learn why silence, in the right hands, is a weapon far sharper than arrogance. Naya looked around the room with the kind of patience that comes from surviving battles no one else saw. She had endured harder rooms, colder stares, sharper insults than this one, but never with so much potential, and never with so much at stake. The matriarch thought the pause meant submission. She was wrong. She lifted her chin again, smugness resurfacing. "You're out of your depth, dear," she said, swirling her wine as if she were conducting an orchestra of mockery. "This is a Lancaster affair. Our world, our rules." A few heads nodded, not out of loyalty, but habit. Naya's eyes softened, almost pity. "Your world," she murmured, "is smaller than you think." The matriarch frowned, as if confused by the idea that her universe might have boundaries. Naya didn't elaborate. She didn't need to, not yet. Instead, she let her gaze drift toward the far corner of the ballroom, where a large, illuminated board displayed the evening's sponsors. Rows of family names, old money, old reputations, old power. Lancaster Industries occupied the top row in bright gold letters. 2 rows beneath it, in smaller type, sat a name the crowd hadn't noticed all evening. Sterling Axis Holdings. No one connected it to the woman standing before them. Why would they? In their world, power came with a spotlight, a surname, a lineage etched into marble. It didn't occur to them that the most powerful person in the room might be the only one who didn't posture for attention. Naya breathed out slowly. "Hello. I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together." "Hello. I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together." Malik watched her, remembering, understanding exactly which past she was reaching for. He had been with her from the beginning when there was no empire, no skyscrapers, no Fortune 50 influence. He had seen her build a global titan from a laptop, a stubborn will, and a refusal to bend. He knew what this silence meant. It was the silence she held before announcing a takeover, the silence she carried before firing a corrupt board, the silence she wielded before reshaping an entire sector. Naya turned back to the matriarch. "You assume," she said softly, "that I walked into your world tonight." The matriarch's expression hardened. "You did." Naya shook her head once, almost gently. "No," she corrected. "What I have," she continued, "is position." Silence spread outward like ink in water. It wasn't clear yet, not to the guests, not to the cameras, not to the Lancasters, but something foundational had shifted. The kind of shift that precedes a collapse. Naya's eyes lifted toward the sponsor board again, then back to the matriarch. "This world you think you own?" She paused. "You're standing on borrowed ground." The matriarch opened her mouth to retort, but for the first time that evening, she didn't find words. Because in Naya's voice, in her stillness, in her precision, she heard something she had never heard before from someone she believed beneath her. Authority. The kind that wasn't learned, the kind that wasn't given, the kind that came from building the very foundations other people mistook for destiny. And as the orchestra hesitated again, bows suspended, breath caught, one truth settled into the marble floor. The Lancaster dynasty had just insulted the wrong woman, and the cost had already begun accumulating. The room was still thrumming with the echo of Naya's last words when the orchestra attempted to reclaim the evening. A timid melody drifted through the chandeliers, but even the music sounded nervous, like it knew it no longer owned the air. Across the ballroom, the Lancasters stood at the center of their empire of glitter, yet something in their posture had shifted. The kind that came from building the very foundations other people mistook for destiny. And as the orchestra hesitated again, bows suspended, breath caught, one truth settled into the marble floor. The Lancaster dynasty had just insulted the wrong woman. And the cost had already begun accumulating. The room was still thrumming with the echo of Naya's last words when the orchestra attempted to reclaim the evening. A timid melody drifted through the chandeliers, but even the music sounded nervous, like it knew it no longer owned the air. Across the ballroom, the Lancasters stood at the center of their empire of glitter, yet something in their posture had shifted. But anyone who had spent enough time in the financial undercurrents of the world knew one truth. When a family is too obsessed with polishing the surface, it's often because the foundation is cracking. The first crack had formed 3 years ago. Lancaster Industries, once a titan of urban development, began bleeding cash through a string of disastrous expansions. A luxury residential project in Dubai stalled. A megamall in Texas collapsed mid-construction due to budget mismanagement. A renewable energy venture failed so spectacularly it became a case study in business schools under what happens when ego outruns expertise. They covered the losses the way old money families always do, by mortgaging tomorrow to protect yesterday's illusion. But anyone who had spent enough time in the financial undercurrents of the world knew one truth. When a family is too obsessed with polishing the surface, it's often because the foundation is cracking. The first crack had formed 3 years ago. Lancaster Industries, once a titan of urban development, began bleeding cash through a string of disastrous expansions. A luxury residential project in Dubai stalled. A megamall in Texas collapsed mid-construction due to budget mismanagement. A renewable energy venture failed so spectacularly it became a case study in business schools under what happens when ego outruns expertise. They covered the losses the way old money families always do, by mortgaging tomorrow to protect yesterday's illusion. Naya watched the matriarch now, observing every twitch of entitlement disguised as certainty. The woman's voice broke the tension first. "Are you done staring?" she snapped, her confidence wobbling beneath the edges. This evening wasn't meant for theatrics. Naya didn't reply immediately. She let the silence settle, slow, dense, deliberate. The crowd leaned in, sensing the weight of something they couldn't yet name. Malik stepped half an inch behind her present, steady, silent. His eyes scanned the room again, reading micro-expressions, catching the subtle panic behind forced smiles. He knew the Lancasters were not afraid of humiliation. They were afraid of exposure. The husband finally spoke, his voice pitched too loudly. "My wife has been extremely gracious. More than you deserve, frankly. Gracious." The word slithered across the marble floor like an insult wearing a tuxedo. Naya tilted her head. "Is that what you call this?" "It's what I call mercy," he countered, lifting his glass as though toasting to his own righteousness. "You should learn to appreciate who hosts you." Naya's eyes flickered to the sponsor board again. Mercy, hosts, illusions the Lancasters clung to like lifelines. If the guests had been paying closer attention, they might have noticed the smallest detail. Beside the Sterling Axis logo, a discrete icon pulsed, barely visible unless you were looking for it. A signal that systems tied to the event's financing, utilities, and broadcast feeds were already shifting, but no one looked. People rarely do when the world appears stable. Naya clasped her hands again, her fingers resting in that same poised interlace that always preceded decisive action. Malik recognized it instantly. His breath steadied, shoulders aligning. It was time. "Naya," the matriarch pressed, trying to regain dominance. "Whatever fantasy you walked in with, leave it at the door. This is our night, our charity, our name on the marquee." Naya's voice came soft, steady, devastatingly calm. "You've mistaken visibility for control." The husband scoffed, but beneath it, the first true flicker of fear. A signal that systems tied to the event's financing, utilities, and broadcast feeds were already shifting. But no one looked. People rarely do when the world appears stable. Naya clasped her hands again, her fingers resting in that same poised interlace that always preceded decisive action. Malik recognized it instantly. His breath steadied, shoulders aligning. It was time. Naya, the matriarch pressed, trying to regain dominance. Whatever fantasy you walked in with, leave it at the door. This is our night, our charity, our name on the marquee. Naya's voice came soft, steady, devastatingly calm. You've mistaken visibility for control. The husband scoffed, but beneath it the first true flicker of fear. Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. You barge into our event, insult our family, and Naya didn't interrupt. She didn't move. She didn't even blink, but Malik did. He took a discreet step forward, the slightest shift of his weight, signaling readiness, a silent conversation written in muscle memory. He wasn't protecting her from danger. He was preparing for impact, because he knew what happened next. Naya finally reached for her phone, slowly, gracefully, like a queen adjusting a crown rather than a woman responding to an insult. The crowd watched the movement with unnerving fascination. A simple gesture, but it carried a gravity the room wasn't built to withstand. The matriarch let out a sharp laugh, brittle and too loud. Oh, what now? She spat. Calling security? Going to file a complaint? Her husband added. You're only making this harder on yourself. But the tone of his voice wavered thin around the edges, intuition gnawing at his confidence. Naya unlocked her phone. One notification pulsed at the top of the screen. Malik saw it. Recognition flickered across his face. It's ready, he whispered. Naya nodded once. Then she typed 3 words. Words the crowd would never hear. Words that would not echo through the ballroom. Words that did not need volume to destroy a dynasty. Pull all contracts. She pressed send. A quiet chime confirmed the transmission. To most in the room, it sounded like nothing. But to the people on the other end, legal teams, financial officers, regulatory liaisons, it was the opening siren of a corporate earthquake. Malik's tablet vibrated next. He didn't smile. He didn't react. He simply read the incoming confirmation. All Lancaster-linked agreements terminated. Withdrawal already in progress. Assets flagged. Partner institutions notified. A second later, the ballroom's massive LED sponsor board blinked, just once. Then again, guests glanced over, assuming it was a minor technical hiccup. It wasn't. Behind the scenes, the event's financial framework, funding feeds, donation routing, sponsorship overlays began to reroute. Systems that had been proudly stamped with the Lancaster crest were losing integration access one by one. The matriarch scowled. What is happening with that screen? Someone fix it! But the tech staff hesitated. Their tablets were lighting up with errors they'd never seen before. Warnings. Red lines. Access revoked. Authority rerouted. A soft murmur rippled through nearby tables. Naya placed her phone back into her clutch with exquisite composure. You asked who I thought I was, she said, her voice low, steady. I'm someone who doesn't raise her voice to be heard. The matriarch took a step toward her, face burning with indignation. You insolent. Naya raised a hand lightly, not to silence her, but as if noting the time. 5 minutes, she murmured. The husband stiffened. 5 minutes until what? Naya looked at him finally, her gaze quiet and devastating. Until the ground you're standing on gives way. Confusion swept the crowd. Then a phone buzzed. Then another, and another. Then dozens. The orchestra faltered as musicians glanced down at glowing screens. Emails, alerts, breaking news flashes. Whispers turned to gasps. Lancaster project frozen. What? Why is the funding withdrawn? Is this serious? Wait, Sterling Axis pulled out? Isn't that the woman in white? Heads turned toward Naya, not with pity, not with amusement, but with dawning, paralytic understanding. The matriarch fumbled for her husband's arm. This is some kind of mistake, she hissed. But he had gone pale. He looked at his phone with hollow eyes like a man reading the obituary of his own fortune. Naya stood still, impeccable, serene. You wanted me gone, she said quietly. So I removed myself from your empire. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't vindictive. It was factual. A verdict delivered without raising a gavel. And now, she added, your empire is returning the favor. The chandeliers above them dimmed as if bowing to the truth of it. The countdown had begun. The first sign wasn't loud. It was a soft ping from the speaker system, an innocent, chime-like note that drifted across the ballroom just as the orchestra attempted to recover its rhythm. Guests looked up, puzzled, as the giant sponsor board flickered a third time. Then the screen went black. A beat of silence. And suddenly white text snapped onto the display, stark and merciless. Sterling Axis Holdings, immediate withdrawal executed. A ripple tore through the crowd. Not the kind born from gossip, but the kind that comes from witnessing the impossible. The matriarch froze mid-breath. What? What is that supposed to mean? But her voice cracked on the last word, cracking the illusion with it. On cue, Malik's tablet illuminated again lines of data scrolling like falling dominoes. Project funding revoked, credit lines severed, joint ventures dissolved, licensing agreements nullified, collateral assets seized. It was the kind of corporate takedown that usually unfolded over months. Naya had collapsed it into minutes. The event's audio system chimed again, another notification routing through the ballroom's digital framework. This time, the donors' tables lit up with alerts from their own banks and investment firms. Whispers sharpened. Lancaster's bonds just tanked. My portfolio is flashing red. Is this live? Is it real? A man in a navy tuxedo stepped back so quickly he nearly toppled a centerpiece. His phone vibrated non-stop in his hand. Our firm just froze all collaborative projects with Lancaster Industries, he said, voice trembling. Every single one. The matriarch stumbled toward the stage. Turn that screen off, she shrieked. But the technicians were already panicking, tapping furiously on their tablets. Mom, we've lost access, one of them stammered. We don't have admin rights anymore. The husband rounded on Naya, fury swirling with fear. You can't do this? You have no authority over our systems. Naya didn't even turn her head. Don't I? As if responding to her words, the ballroom's LED panels flickered again, this time revealing a second update. Lancaster Megaproject. Status terminated. Effective immediately. By order of Sterling Axis CEO. A hush fell, a deep, reverent hush, like a cathedral after the final bell. Slowly, painfully, the truth began to dawn. People looked from the screen to Naya, to each other, and finally back to the Lancasters, whose faces had drained of all color. Someone whispered the words the entire crowd was trying to assemble. Shez the CEO, Shez the Sterling Axis. The matriarch's knees wavered. Her husband's wineglass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble in a burst of red like the first drop of blood from an empire about to collapse. Phones everywhere lit up again, this time with news headlines firing across the city. Breaking. $30B. Lancaster Sterling deal collapses. Mid-gala market shockwaves expected. The orchestra stopped playing altogether. Not because they were told to, in truth. No one in the room had the authority to tell them anything anymore. They stopped because they, like everyone else, could feel the shift. This wasn't humiliation, this wasn't a scene, this wasn't drama, this was power, pure surgical power. A dynasty dismantled in real time. And at the center of it still, calm, unshaken, stood the woman they thought didn't belong, the woman who owned the room without raising her voice. The gala dissolved into noise, fractured, frantic, directionless. Conversations that once flowed like champagne now collided in jagged bursts. Laughter evaporated. Pride curdled into panic. The entire ballroom felt like a ship tilting, the floor steady but everyone losing balance anyway. Phones buzzed non-stop, an electronic storm. Guests stared at their screens as notifications stacked faster than they could blink. Lancaster stock plunges 47% in early after-hours trading. Sterling Axis confirms full withdrawal. $30B deal dead. Anonymous source. The CEO was at the gala during the collapse. Viral video. Heiress mocks unidentified black woman moments before financial shutdown. The last headline included a thumbnail image, blurry, grainy, unmistakable, the matriarch's finger, pointed, accusing, cruel. And across from her, the woman in white unmoved, dignified. A tremor ran through the room. Suddenly, every guest who had laughed earlier felt their stomach drop. The room's collective memory rewound, replaying the insult in their minds with horrifying clarity. And this time, they understood who had been standing there. Some people lowered their phones as if the devices had betrayed them. Others immediately hid them behind their backs, pretending they hadn't captured the earlier humiliation for entertainment. But it was too late. The internet had already decided the narrative. Hashtags detonated across social platforms. Number Naya Sterling number, power in silence number, Lancaster fall number, gala meltdown number, wrong woman live stream clips from inside the ballroom hit trending within minutes. Some guests tried to defend the Lancasters only to be drowned out by comments pointing to the footage. The public didn't see a scandal, they saw a lesson. A woman mocked in a room built on arrogance, who dismantled that arrogance without lifting her voice. The orchestra, paralyzed, abandoned their instruments. One violinist whispered, "I think we're witnessing history," before slowly backing away from the stage. Across the ballroom, donors huddled in urgent whispers. "We can't stay aligned with the Lancasters, this is catastrophic. They're finished. Completely finished. Do you think she'll speak to us? Should we approach her? No, not now. Not like this." Even the event host, who an hour earlier radiated confidence, now looked like a man clinging to the last thread of his career. He approached Naya hesitantly, voice trembling. Miss Sterling, I didn't realize." Naya didn't let him finish. She wasn't unkind, she simply didn't owe him reassurance. Her silence alone answered him. She hadn't come for recognition, she came for truth. And truth had finally caught up to the room. Meanwhile, the matriarch frantically tapped her phone, hands shaking. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "Fix it! Fix it!" But every new notification cut deeper. Creditors suspend Lancaster accounts. Regulators investigating misreported assets. Partner firms dissolve contracts effective immediately. Her world was unraveling thread by thread, headline by headline. People began moving away from the Lancaster table, physically distancing themselves as if reputation were contagious. The powerful, the wealthy, the self-important, they all took several small steps back. All except Naya. She hadn't moved an inch. She stood centered, dignified, untouched by the chaos she hadn't started, but had every right to finish. Malik scanned the room, noting every shift. Loyalty fleeing, alliances recalibrating, fear replacing arrogance. "They're turning on them," he murmured. "Not turning," Naya replied quietly, revealing. She lifted her gaze, letting it sweep across the crowd. No judgment, no gloating, just clarity. Every person who had laughed at her earlier now found themselves avoiding her eyes as if looking at her meant acknowledging their own cowardice. And above them all, the sponsor board displayed a final system message that no one could ignore. Sterling Access primary benefactor status activated. The room understood. They hadn't just witnessed a downfall. They had just met the woman who would decide what rose in its place. The sponsor board dimmed, then brightened its golden glow, casting a halo over Naya, as if the room itself were compelled to acknowledge her. The guests, once indifferent, now stood frozen in a semicircle, their faces shifting between awe and dread. The matriarch clutched her husband's arm, her voice strangled. "This is a misunderstanding. It has to be. Someone tell her to stop this." But Naya wasn't doing anything. That was the part that terrified them. She simply existed in the truth they had tried to deny. The husband finally stepped forward, a desperate tremor hidden beneath his posture. "Who are you?" he demanded, though the question wilted on his tongue. He already sensed the answer. Naya regarded him with a calm so absolute, it felt ceremonial. "I'm the person you mocked," she said softly, "and the person your empire relied on." Gasps rippled, but she wasn't finished. "I'm also," she continued, "the woman whose signature your entire future was waiting for." The sponsor board flickered again, this time revealing her full name across the entire screen, Dr. Naya Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Access Holdings. A shudder passed through the room. It was no longer rumor. No speculation, no assumption. It was fact. The matriarch's knees buckled. "No," she whispered. "It's impossible." You can't be." Naya stepped closer, not threatening, simply present, undeniably so. "You asked earlier who let me in," she said. Her voice was cool steel wrapped in silk. I did. The chandeliers seemed to dim in reverence. And you asked why I thought I belonged here. She held the matriarch's gaze. I belong anywhere I choose to stand. Silence fell so deep, it felt like the room bowed with it. Because in that moment, for the first time all night, the Lancasters finally understood exactly who they had insulted and what it was going to cost them. The fallout came swiftly. Within 48 hours, Lancaster Industries collapsed under regulatory audits, frozen accounts, and fleeing partners. Their legacy, once carved into marble, crumbled into headlines and cautionary tales. Naya never mentioned the gala again. She redirected the reclaimed $30B into a new initiative, the Sterling Promise Fund, supporting Black women founders across the country. As she stepped out of the gala that night, Malik beside her, the city lights reflected off her white gown like quiet fire. Power hadn't shouted. It had simply spoken, and the world listened.